The clinking of silverware against porcelain was the only sound that punctuated the heavy silence in the dining room. Emily watched her husband, Richard, as he meticulously cut into his steak, his movements precise and controlled, much like every other aspect of their life together. The crystal glasses, a wedding gift from his parents, gleamed under the soft light of the chandelier, reflecting a distorted image of a woman who felt increasingly like a stranger to herself. For 15 years, their dinners had followed this silent ritual. In the beginning, she had tried to fill the quiet with chatter about her day, stories about the small flower shop she dreamed of opening, or anecdotes from the books she read. But Richard's responses were always dismissive, a curt nod here, a non-committal hum there. He preferred order, silence, and a life free of what he called unnecessary frivolities. Slowly, her stories dwindled, her dreams were packed away like old photographs, and the silence became a permanent guest at their table. Tonight, however, a small seed of rebellion had taken root in Emily's heart. Her best friend, Clara, was finally opening her own art gallery, a dream they had both shared in their youth. The grand opening was in a week, and Emily wanted to buy a special dress for the occasion. It wasn't just about the dress. It was about celebrating a dream that hadn't been extinguished. It was about feeling like herself again, just for one night. She cleared her throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. Richard's eyes, a cool and distant gray, flickered up from his plate. "I was thinking," she began, her voice barely a whisper. She tried again, forcing a more confident tone. "Clara's gallery opening is next Friday. I saw a lovely blue dress at the boutique downtown. I thought I might buy it for the event." Richard placed his knife and fork down, aligning them perfectly on the edge of his plate. He took a slow sip of water, his gaze never leaving her face. The look wasn't angry, not yet. It was something worse, a look of patient condescension, as if she were a child asking for a toy she couldn't have. "A new dress?" he said, his voice smooth and level. "And what's wrong with the dresses you already own? Your closet is full of them." "There's nothing wrong with them," Emily replied, her hands twisting a linen napkin in her lap. "I just wanted something new, something special for Clara's big night." "Want?" Richard repeated the word as if it were a foreign concept. "Emily, we've discussed this. Our financial goals require discipline. A new dress is an unnecessary expense. It's frivolous." The word stung, as it always did. Frivolous. It was the label he attached to anything that brought her a sliver of joy, anything that wasn't practical or part of his meticulously crafted 5-year plan. "It's not that expensive, Richard," she pressed on, a knot tightening in her stomach. "I could use the money from the household account. There's more than enough." A faint, humorless smile touched his lips. "Ah, but you see, that's where you're mistaken. It's not about whether there's enough. It's about principle. It's my money, Emily. I earn it, and I decide how it's spent. That money is for household necessities, not for whims." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a low, firm tone that left no room for argument. "You are not allowed to spend it on a dress." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Not allowed. She was a 40-year-old woman, and her husband had just told her she was not allowed to buy a dress with money she believed was partly hers. Humiliation washed over her, hot and bitter. It wasn't just about the dress anymore. It was about the 15 years of being treated like an employee, a household manager who received an allowance and had to justify every penny. She looked at the man across the table, the man she had once loved for his ambition and confidence, and saw only a gatekeeper, a warden of her own life. Her throat felt tight, and she could only nod, her gaze dropping back to her plate, the food now tasteless. The silence that returned was heavier than before, filled with the weight of unspoken words and a dream that had just been denied. The next morning, the house was filled with the same oppressive silence. Richard had left for the office at dawn, his routine as predictable as the sunrise. He left behind a perfectly made bed and a note on the kitchen counter with a list of errands for her. Dry cleaning, pick up prescription, schedule plumber for the guest bathroom. There was no mention of their conversation, no apology, not even an acknowledgement of the tension that had fractured the previous evening. To Richard, the matter was closed. He had given his verdict, and Emily was expected to comply. She moved through the house like a ghost, the echo of his words, "You are not allowed," following her from room to room. Humiliation had simmered overnight into a quiet, cold anger. For years, she had accepted his control as a byproduct of his responsible nature. He was the provider, the one who managed their finances with an iron will, ensuring they were always secure. She had convinced herself that her role was to support his vision, to maintain the perfect home that served as a backdrop for his successful life. In exchange, her own life had been whittled down to a series of errands and household chores, her own desires deemed frivolous. She looked at her reflection in the hallway mirror. Her eyes seemed dull, her shoulders slumped. The vibrant young woman who once dreamed of traveling the world and opening a flower shop had been replaced by this muted version of herself. It was the dress, she realized, that had cracked the facade. It was such a small thing, a simple piece of fabric, but it represented a choice, a piece of autonomy she desperately craved. Being denied it felt like being denied a breath of fresh air. Sighing, she picked up the list of errands. It was easier to move, to do, than to sit and drown in her own thoughts. As she was about to grab her car keys, the landline phone on the small mahogany table in the entryway began to ring. Its shrill, old-fashioned sound was a rarity in their modern, silent home. They mostly used their cell phones, and the landline was usually only disturbed by telemarketers. She almost ignored it, but on the third ring, she picked it up. "Hello? Good morning. Am I speaking with Mrs. Emily Sterling?" a polite professional voice asked on the other end. "Yes, this is she," Emily replied, a flicker of apprehension running through her. "Excellent. My name is David Chen, from the law firm Chen, Albright and Associates. I'm calling on behalf of a new client regarding a financial matter. I must confirm, are you the primary account holder for the Sterling Family Trust?" Emily froze, her mind struggling to process the question. The Sterling Family Trust? She knew of its existence, of course. It was the bedrock of their finances, the untouchable fortress where Richard kept their life savings, investments, and the inheritance he had received from his grandfather. Richard managed it all. He often spoke of it in grand, abstract terms, a testament to his financial acumen. But primary account holder? The term felt foreign, official, and completely disconnected from her reality. I think you may have the wrong person," she stammered. "My husband, Richard Sterling, handles all of our finances. He's the one who manages that trust. I'm just his wife." She hated how small her own words sounded. Just his wife. There was a brief pause on the other end, the rustling of papers. "I see," Mr. Chen said, his tone still polite but now with a hint of confusion. "That's not what the documentation indicates. The trust was established 15 years ago, shortly after your marriage. The founding documents clearly list you, Emily Sterling, as the primary and sole signatory, the primary account holder. Mr. Richard Sterling is listed as a secondary beneficiary, with access rights but no authority to make unilateral changes or disbursements without your explicit written consent. Has that status been amended recently?" The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Emily gripped the edge of the table for support, her knuckles turning white. Sole signatory? Primary account holder? The lawyer's words swirled in her head, nonsensical and yet terrifyingly clear. For 15 years, Richard had lectured her about his money, controlled every expenditure, and made her feel like a dependent child. But according to this stranger on the phone, the fortress Richard had built around their lives was not his at all. It was hers. The keys to the kingdom, which she never even knew existed, had apparently been in her pocket all along. "Mrs. Sterling, are you still there?" Mr. Chen asked, his voice laced with concern. Emily couldn't speak. She could only stare at her own wide, disbelieving eyes in the mirror, as the truth of her situation, a truth that had been hidden from her for her entire marriage, began to dawn. "Mrs. Sterling, are you there?" David Chen's voice gently pulled her back from the precipice of shock. Emily took a shaky breath, her mind racing to connect the dots of a puzzle she never knew she was a part of. "Yes," she managed to say, her voice thin and reedy. "I'm here. I don't understand. Why would it be set up this way?" "I can't speak to your husband's motivations," Mr. Chen replied tactfully, "but the arrangement itself is not uncommon. It was likely established by the original benefactor, Richard's grandfather, I believe, as a way to ensure your long-term security. The language in the trust is quite specific. It was designed to give you ultimate control. As for why I'm calling, my client, the Westview Children's Foundation, was designated as a recurring beneficiary. A modest annual disbursement was scheduled. That payment was halted 3 years ago. When we contacted Mr. Sterling, he informed us that he, as the trustee, had decided to redirect the funds. However, our due diligence uncovered the fact that he does not, and has never had, the authority to make such a change. That power rests solely with you. The Children's Foundation." Emily remembered Richard mentioning it once, years ago, dismissing it as a sentimental project of my grandfather's that was no longer financially prudent. He had made it sound like a minor footnote, a loose end he had tidied up. He hadn't told her he had stopped the payments. He had presented it as a decision that was his to make. The deception was staggering, a web of lies so intricate and vast it covered their entire marriage. Every lecture on frugality, every denial of a small pleasure, every time he said "my money," it was all a performance, a carefully constructed illusion designed to keep her powerless and ignorant. He hadn't been protecting their assets. He had been hoarding power. "Mr. Chen," Emily said, a strange calm settling over her as anger began to solidify into resolve. "I had no knowledge of any of this. My husband has led me to believe the complete opposite." "I suspected as much," the lawyer said, "which is why I contacted you directly. The Foundation would prefer to resolve this amicably. All we require is the signature of the primary account holder, you, to reinstate the payments." He paused. "Mrs. Sterling, this is, of course, a delicate family matter. But from a legal standpoint, you are in a position of significant authority. I would be happy to send you a secure digital copy of the Trust's founding articles so you can review them yourself. It might help clarify things." "Yes," Emily said, the word coming out sharp and clear. "Please, send it to me." She gave him her email address, the one she used for her book club and online recipes, a part of her life that Richard had always ignored. After ending the call, she stood motionless in the silent hallway for a long time. The list of errands on the table seemed like a relic from another life. Pick up dry cleaning. The mundanity of it was almost laughable. Her entire world had just been upended, the very foundation of her marriage revealed as a fraud, and she was supposed to go about her day as if nothing had changed. She walked into Richard's home office, a room that had always felt like his sacred territory. It was immaculate, organized, and cold. She had rarely entered it without his express permission. Now she looked at the heavy oak desk, the leather-bound books, the framed photos of Richard with important-looking men, and saw it all for what it was, a stage set for his grand deception. He wasn't just a controlling husband. He was a liar. He had willfully and systematically misled her for 15 years, keeping her a prisoner in a gilded cage while he controlled the keys that were rightfully hers. A chime from her laptop announced a new email. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She sat down in Richard's imposing leather chair, a chair she had never sat in before, and opened the message from Chen, Albright, and Associates. There it was, a scanned PDF of a document dated 2 weeks after their wedding day, the Sterling Family Trust. She scrolled through pages of dense legal text, her eyes scanning for the relevant clauses. And then she found it. Article 4, Governance and Authority. The primary account holder and sole signatory shall be Emily Sterling, formerly Emily Wallace. All decisions regarding disbursements, investments, and amendments to the trust require her written and notarized consent. Richard Sterling is designated as a secondary beneficiary and may act as a consultant or manager of the funds, but he holds no final authority and cannot unilaterally alter the trust's directives. The words blurred through the tears welling in her eyes. They were not tears of sadness, but of a profound, earth-shattering rage. He had not only lied, but he had also made her complicit in his deception. He had used her signature, her very name, to build his kingdom, while convincing her she was little more than a guest within its walls. She closed the laptop. The silence in the house no longer felt oppressive. It felt different. It felt like the calm before a storm, and Emily, for the first time in a very long time, was ready to make it rain. The leather of Richard's chair felt cold against Emily's skin. She pushed herself up, leaving the oppressive chill of his office behind. The list of errands on the mahogany table seemed to mock her, a directive from a man who had forfeited any right to direct her. With a steady hand, she picked up the piece of paper, crumpled it into a tight ball, and dropped it into the wastebasket. It was a small, quiet act, but it felt monumental. A declaration of independence whispered into the silent house. She grabbed her purse and car keys, bypassing the sensible sedan Richard had insisted she drive, and instead took his car. It was a sleek silver convertible, a car he babied and drove only on weekends. He had often told her it was too much car for her to handle. A bitter smile played on her lips as the engine roared to life with a satisfying growl. Driving it felt like another small rebellion. She didn't drive to the dry cleaners or the pharmacy. She drove downtown, the wind whipping through her hair, a sensation that felt wild and liberating. She parked in front of the little boutique she had mentioned to Richard, the one with the blue dress in the window. For a moment she hesitated. The ingrained habit of seeking permission, of weighing every expense was a powerful one. She could still hear Richard's voice in her head, labeling the purchase as frivolous, unnecessary. Then she remembered the crisp, clear words of the trust document. Sole signatory. She pushed the boutique door open, a small bell announcing her arrival. The blue dress was even more beautiful up close, a cascade of silk in a shade that reminded her of the ocean on a clear day. "May I try this on?" she asked the shop owner, her voice steady. In the dressing room, she shed the conservative beige clothes she had worn for years, Richard's preferred color palette for her, and slipped into the blue dress. It fit perfectly. The woman who looked back at her in the mirror was not the muted, downtrodden wife from the breakfast table. This woman had a spark in her eye. She stood a little taller. The color made her feel alive. "I'll take it," she said, without a flicker of doubt. As the owner wrapped the dress in tissue paper, Emily's eyes fell on a brightly colored silk scarf, patterned with flowers that reminded her of the shop she had once dreamed of opening. On impulse, she added it to her purchase. It was utterly frivolous. It was wonderful. Instead of going straight home, she found a quiet cafe nearby. She ordered a latte and a pastry, things Richard would have called empty calories, and sat at a small table by the window. She pulled out her phone and dialed David Chen's number. "Mr. Chen, it's Emily Sterling," she said when he answered. "Mrs. Sterling, I'm glad you called. Have you had a chance to review the document?" "I have," Emily said, taking a sip of her latte. The warmth spread through her, chasing away the last of her hesitation. "And I have a few more questions. You said I am the sole signatory. What does that mean in practical terms? How do I access this trust?" "It means you have complete control," he explained patiently. "The assets are currently managed by a portfolio manager at Sterling Investments. Your husband's firm, I presume. This is not a conflict of interest in itself, but given the circumstances, you may want to change that. You have the right to move the assets to any financial institution you choose. You can change the manager, redirect funds, or liquidate assets as you see fit within the terms of the trust. As for access, the first step would be to formally notify the current holding institution of your authority. A letter from my office, along with a notarized copy of your identification and the relevant articles of the trust, would be the standard procedure." Emily listened intently, the pieces clicking into place. This was no longer just about a dress. This was about her entire life, her future, her security. "My husband is listed as the manager on the account," Emily stated, testing the waters. "Can I remove him from that position?" "Yes," Mr. Chen confirmed. "You can designate a new manager at any time. You could appoint a professional from a neutral firm or even manage it yourself, though I would recommend professional guidance. You can also request a full, detailed audit of the trust's activity since its inception. Given what you've told me, it might be a prudent step. An audit." The thought sent a jolt of electricity through her. A full accounting of every decision Richard had made, every dollar he had moved. The idea was terrifying and deeply, deeply satisfying. "Thank you, Mr. Chen," Emily said, her mind buzzing with newfound possibilities. "You've given me a lot to think about. I believe I would like to retain your services to move forward. I would be honored to represent you, Mrs. Sterling," he replied. After the call, Emily sat in the cafe for a while longer, watching the world go by. The fear and humiliation that had plagued her for years were being replaced by a sense of clarity she hadn't felt since before she was married. She had been living in a house of cards, and a single phone call had blown it all away. Now, she was standing in the rubble, but she was free. Holding the bag with her new dress, she walked back to the powerful, gleaming car. It was time to go home and wait for the man who called himself the master of the house to return to a kingdom that was no longer his. When Emily returned home, the house felt different. It was no longer a cage, but simply a building of wood and stone. She walked through it with a new sense of ownership. She went into the master bedroom and laid the blue silk dress out on the bed, a vibrant slash of color against the pale, muted tones Richard insisted upon. The matching scarf was draped over it, a final flourish of defiance. She didn't hide the shopping bag or the receipt. She left them on the kitchen island, a place he could not possibly miss. Then she waited. She didn't busy herself with chores or prepare his dinner. Instead, she made herself a cup of tea and sat in the living room, not in her usual armchair, but in his. She held the warm mug in her hands, feeling a profound sense of calm. She had spent the afternoon reading and rereading the trust document. With every page, 15 years of self-doubt and manufactured inadequacy had peeled away, revealing the strong, capable woman who had been buried underneath. The sound of Richard's key in the front door at precisely 6:30 p.m. was a familiar sound that now signaled the beginning of the end. He stepped inside, his briefcase in one hand, his face set in its usual impassive mask. "Emily?" he called out, his tone already laced with irritation. He expected to find the scent of dinner cooking, the house in perfect order. Instead, he found silence and a shopping bag on the counter. He walked over to it, pulled out the receipt, and a muscle in his jaw twitched. He saw the keys to his convertible on the hook. "Did you drive my car?" Emily didn't answer immediately. She let him walk into the living room, let him find her sitting in his chair. "Hello, Richard," she said, her voice even and calm. His eyes flickered from her face to the receipt in his hand. "I see you ignored our conversation," he said, his voice dangerously low. "I thought I made it perfectly clear. You were not allowed to buy a dress." "You did make yourself clear," Emily replied, setting her teacup down on the side table. "You made it clear that you believe you have the authority to allow or disallow my actions. You believe that all of this," she gestured around the lavishly decorated room, "is yours to control. The money, the house, me. But you and I both know that's not true, don't we?" A flicker of confusion crossed his face, quickly replaced by annoyance. "What are you talking about? Of course it's true. I built this life. I earned the money that pays for that dress." "Did you?" Emily stood up, her posture straight and confident. "Or did you just manage money that was never yours to begin with? I had a very interesting phone call this morning from a lawyer, Mr. David Chen. Does the name ring a bell?" The color drained from Richard's face. His mask of controlled indifference didn't just crack, it shattered. For the first time in their marriage, Emily saw true, naked fear in her husband's eyes. "He represents the Westview Children's Foundation," she continued, her voice gaining strength with every word. "It seems the annual payments your grandfather designated for them suddenly stopped 3 years ago. When Mr. Chen inquired, you told him that you, the trustee, had decided to stop them. But that was a lie, wasn't it, Richard?" He stared at her, speechless. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "It was a lie," Emily pressed on, "because you are not the trustee. You've never been the trustee. I am. I am the primary account holder and the sole signatory of the Sterling Family Trust. Your grandfather, a man far wiser than you, put me in charge of everything. You are merely a secondary beneficiary. You have no authority. You have no control. All those years you spent lecturing me about your money, you were lying. Emily, you don't understand," he finally choked out, taking a step toward her. His composure was gone, replaced by a desperate panic. "I did it for us, to protect us. You're not good with money. You're too emotional, too frivolous. I had to manage it. I was protecting you from yourself." The excuse was so pathetic, so transparent, that Emily almost laughed. "Protecting me? You weren't protecting me. You were controlling me. You built a prison and convinced me it was a palace. You made me feel small so you could feel big. You told me I wasn't allowed to spend a few $100s on a dress when, in reality, I had millions at my disposal that you had no right to touch without my permission." She walked past him, towards the hallway. "I spoke with Mr. Chen again this afternoon. He is now my lawyer. He will be sending a letter to your firm tomorrow morning, informing them of a change in management for the trust. I will be moving all the assets to a neutral third-party institution. Oh, and I've also authorized a full forensic audit of the trust's activities for the past 15 years. I want to see every decision you made, every dollar you moved, every lie you told." Richard looked as if he had been struck. "An audit? Emily, no. That's not necessary. We can talk about this. I'll give you an allowance, a bigger one. You can buy all the dresses you want." His desperate offer was the final, tragic confirmation of how little he had ever known her. "This was never about a dress, Richard. This was about my life. A life you stole from me with your condescension and your lies. But that's over now." She paused at the bottom of the stairs, looking back at the broken man standing in the middle of the room. "By the way, I reinstated the payments to the Children's Foundation. It was the first decision I made as the person actually in charge." She turned and walked up the stairs, leaving him alone in the suffocating silence of the empire he had built on a foundation of deceit. She entered the bedroom and looked at the blue dress, a beacon of hope laid out on their bed. It was more than just a dress now. It was a symbol of her reclamation. It was the first page of her next chapter. She didn't know what the future held. A divorce, a new home, perhaps even that little flower shop she used to dream of. But for the first time in a very long time, she knew that the future was hers, and hers alone, to decide.